Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Arish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I have Omer Omar. Omer is co-founder and CEO of Apollo. The company builds Diadem, a digital platform for discovering organic materials. Diadem searches a database of about 50 million purchasable molecules with pre-computed optoelectronic properties. The platform lets experimentalists search, run advanced calculations on cloud servers, and order candidate molecules. Omer is a digital chemist who does not work in the lab, but helps those who do. In today's episode, we talk about making material science available to everyone.
Although we would work on sort of bespoke projects, especially at the beginning, the point is to translate everything that we build into that sort of scalable software product.
Following in the footsteps of computational biology, how to ensure bias doesn't enter molecule discovery.
The only bias that we introduce is synthetic accessibility. So when we add new molecules, they are technically novel and haven't been synthesized before, but they won't be designed for a given property. Instead, they'll be designed for certain easy and facile chemical reactions.
And how access to quantum calculations has changed the speed to discovery.
Quantum chemistry-based calculations, which you couldn't do before, and now you can do them at massive speeds, especially by implementing ML corrections or machine learning corrections to speed up the process.
Making the case for organic solar, how to make tech transfer actually work, and equally also how to figure out how to go from lab to production, right? Like how to go from a kilo or a meter to a kilometer or a ton, right? Ultimately, how do you get from molecule to device?
Whether or not you go all the way to device and you want to increase the speed of that entire stack, that early stage of material discovery is still a bottleneck.
Let's get straight into it. Hi there, guys. Whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Arish. I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe wherever you listen. And if you ever want to chat to me, do reach out on LinkedIn or on X. I'm always up for a bit of a natter. Right, let's get back into it. Omer, really great to have you in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining and for, making the trip, despite it being a very sunny day, all the way down from up north down to sunny North London.
Thank you. It was a sort of sunny all the way, which is surprising given that it probably shouldn't have been sunny in the north, but it was. So it's a good day.
I mean, look, if the sun is shining anywhere, it's a good day in the UK.
A good day, a good drive.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We're going to dive straight in, right? So let's talk about turning material discovery from a kind of bespoke service into a repeatable software product. So you say you standardized workflows and declined bespoke projects. So at what point does the standardization cut off valuable custom discovery work? And what are the misallocations or customer churn that you've accepted in order to scale?
Yeah. So, that's the main thing. So you mentioned it right then, it's scalability. So the main idea and the focus is to build a software product that democratizes access to material scientists who want to use it, no matter sort of whether they're a startup lab, academic, or big enterprise. So although we would work on sort of bespoke projects, especially at the beginning, the point is to translate everything that we build into that sort of scalable software product. That does definitely come with some caveats. If you're working on a very specific device, say given you're developing a new OLED and you found a new material that might make the OLED a little bit more efficient or gives that better color purity, then you have the materials discovery part where you can predict a molecule. This molecule is going to be great for this, and all the way to device, there is a big sort of separation there in the capabilities that you need to sort of have it in the predictive side of things. So if you're doing modeling, you can't necessarily provide every single predictive tool in one place. That would be very difficult. So you can take on projects where you can use your expertise and a team that can go a little bit deeper into that and maybe even support on the experimental side of things. But the software is there as an initial starting point. So whether or not you go all the way to device and you want to increase the speed of that entire stack, that early stage of material discovery is still a bottleneck. So finding the material, even coming up with the idea of a material that's going to perform a certain way. So in the current OLED space, they are looking for a deep blue pixel. They currently don't have an efficient deep blue pixel or a stable one. And so finding that molecule with those fundamental properties is still a challenge. You don't know what the molecule looks like. Getting it to device, it's its own challenge. But yeah, so you to streamline that from sort of idea or that what you're looking for property, invert the prediction find the molecule, and then take it to lab. That we can streamline that.
So what, I guess what I'm hearing, or the question that I have then is, what the hell were they doing beforehand, right? So presumably they were just experimenting with different molecules to see, or, you know, it kind of feels crazy to me that there wouldn't have been some sort of database or knowledge, knowledge center for these molecules. I mean, this is essentially what you've built, right? But like, if I'm in the lab and I'm looking for this, you know, deep blue light emitting molecule, why have I not been able to find that in the past?
Yeah, I mean, so nobody before us considered the sort of publicly available databases on molecules that exist. So that was our first sort of crux was, there are so many molecules out there that have been synthesized and can be synthesized and that can be procured that haven't been considered for a given application. Right. So that was the first dive in. So there was many people and efforts and academics who are working on building libraries of very specific molecules for a given application. So sort of they're doing the inverse design, but also using forward models to get to these sort of amazing materials that can do everything, but chances are you can't synthesize them at all. So that organic chemistry is hard. Forming carbon-carbon bonds is very hard. So you can design a molecule, it'll be amazing. It'll be, you can tune its properties exactly as you want. Chances are no one's going to synthesize it. So we said, okay, well, there's massive databases of chemicals. Start there. And so we were the first to sort of run those high performance, so to use high performance computing to sort of run in parallel for all those molecules, properties at the quantum chemical level. So this is to say everything that we've done kind of comes at the heels of what they did in drug discovery.
Got it.
They used big public databases, they screened for properties, and now it's a very normal part of the culture where they are looking for a specific sort of target enzyme for a drug or something, a molecule that will bind to a specific enzyme, and they'll screen them virtually, and then they'll get loads to the lab, and then they'll test them in the high throughput experimentation. That culture isn't there for electronics, mainly because you couldn't do those calculations en masse. It's sort of in the 70s and 80s.
Sure.
But now with the architecture that we have, you can run those codes for millions of molecules as we did. And so we started there. We were the first to do it. And indeed, like many companies and academic labs might have their own sort of internal data sets, like I said, bespoke ones that look at specific material designs, but not this sort of unbiased approach where, okay, see what you can find if you screen everything that exists. So yeah, they were, I'd say, walking into it blindly. They definitely had, an experimentalist would have had computational support, but it is quite siloed. They often don't talk to each other. Computationalists very much focus on very sort of deep problems for a given material. Again, wasting a little bit of time there, and there's not really the culture of the high throughput screening. And yeah, so when we did that, and it was sort of part of a project, we did test this. We said that, what materials can we find that were unexpected? So we looked for materials for sensing applications. So if you don't know, there's something called dual emission, which is a molecule that emits at 2 different frequencies. That's very rare, and usually molecules will only emit at 1 frequency. So at 500 nanometers, 700 nanometers, whatever it is, just one. It excites, and then it emits a light at a very specific frequency. That dual emission breaks something called the Cash's rule. And we screened for this property. And we found, 19 potentially dual emitting molecules. In fact, we found more, but 19 that we procured. And we did some very fast experimental tests ourselves and found 2 of them were actually dual emitting.
Okay.
And before that, the molecules were known as like medicaments or precursors for making drugs for the treatment of arthritis. So these electronically active molecules that were not known for anything other than medicine previously, we found. So we were just sort of the first to do it. It very much comes from a culture that already existed in a lateral sort of field.
Yeah, it's kind of, you build on the shoulders of others. Sort of, right?
Yeah, and that building that culture around it. So it is still difficult, sort of getting that culture across to the people who are working in the space where they're like, okay, they'll look at literature, what's worked in the past, and just build off of that. So there's a molecule that's already good, it might emit light, but it's not stable. So let's just make it more stable. Let's add bits to it. Like I said, organic chemistry is hard though. So trying to get it to work can take a lot of trial and error in the lab. People can get very hyper-focused on one specific design. Is bias, right? You're introducing a lot of bias into the process, which is there. And that's what causes, I think, a lot of waste.
With sunk cost sort of fallacy, right? Like we started here, we spent a bunch of time and energy and money. We got to solve it using this rather than looking for like a novel molecule that could actually just do this.
I mean, and even taking sort of blue sky element apart a little bit, it is also licensing and IP. So getting across to people that, well, there are a whole host of materials, but that, it's almost like, but they exist. So they must be patented, or there must be some licensing terms of how can we license them. So, but you can for a given property. There's obviously ways around the IP and things like that, but that is also a major element for them. You know, if we've not made it, or if it doesn't come from previous literature that we sort of came up with, or doesn't fit our licenses that exist, then that is also a big hurdle for them as well to break down.
So and break down for me, like, so are we talking about experimentalists in like small labs? Are we talking about universities? Are we talking about like Samsung? Like, because you talked about, you know, OLED for you know, TVs or for curved screens, etc. So that immediately I'm thinking Sony, Samsung, you know, all the usuals, Toshiba, whoever else. Is this essentially a way for them to experiment with and test new materials, or is it really only at the very, very sort of, you know, bleeding edge, I guess, of science that people are looking for applications?
I think you see from our sort of initial early conversations, and it's just, I think it's an element of our network there, is that academics are very interested because they do want to see the new materials. They want to publish on a new material, and potentially up until that point, many materials that sort of won the prizes were discovered through serendipity. So now it's kind of that more guided discovery, which I think we should be doing with the age of compute and things like that. But really our intention is for any material scientist, experimentalist in the space. So that can be from academic labs to startups, to RTOs, to the tier one enterprises who have labs who are working on that very specific problem. I think the main thing is that it's the early stage material discovery. And all of them are working on that. I mean, admittedly, you have Samsung has probably a lot more emphasis on the device side of things. Not to make huge assumptions, but they might have more emphasis on that. And then their support where they focus on sort of ML and machine learning and AI to discover new materials, have like small units elsewhere where they do some fancy things there. So they think that they've got it covered, I guess, on that side of things. But like I said, that even just that disconnect between the computational scientists and the experimentalists is, that is a big divide. And all these patchwork institutions not really working together for, you know, a very focused design of a given material. And that is ubiquitous across sort of all material sectors. It's not just organic electronics.
I'd say it's ubiquitous across all organizations, right? The silo mentality is well known, Chinese walls, and you know, all the kind of difficulties that you can have transferring, you know, some knowledge from one part of the business to the next. And again, people then try to protect their own, you know, their you know, if you've got an experimentalist whose literal job is to sit there and look for molecules, you know, they may well be sat there going, well, okay, well, hold on, why would, you know, if I use Apollo, then what the hell is the point in me, right? Like, so you have all of the usual political reasons why people then don't adopt new technologies. But it's interesting, you know, a couple of the clients that we work with very much are on that sort of life sciences side, where it is computational plus, you know, plus existing literature, exactly in the way that you've talked about, you know, to mechanistically kind of look at certain interactions and outcomes. And it feels like this is kind of the path that you are potentially going down, right?
I mean, one distinction as well, and it's yet to be seen, is I think one of the reasons why computational biology and those kind of things in the drug discovery space found so much purchase is that they almost have this mentality of, if you're starting a new company where you're screening for a given drug, it's kind of like, you know, go big or go home on that specific medicine or that specific target. So what they do is they, you know, do lots of screening. So they're very happy to screen thousands. And if they get that one hit, then they go through all the sort of regulatory hurdles. And then they sell the company at the point of finding the molecule and sort of doing all that other thing.
Because it costs $2 billion to bring a drug to market, right? So they need to find,
So electronics works fundamentally different to that. If anything, that material is going to be a very closely held secret, and whether or not it even gets into, you know, when it gets into a final device, how long does it stay there? You know, the cycles are much quicker on that, and you know, there's various things you can do to protect the IP and things like that. But often, it's found that the industry moves more quickly than that. So they're trying to get to the next generation constantly. They're looking more 5 years down the line. So I don't think you would build a company to sell a given molecule. That's why I think for us, the idea of Apollo was to just, you know, give access to all that information to sort of, you know, not to say you don't carry on doing what you're doing in terms of that sort of finding a good material, working on it, tweaking it. But now you have a whole host of materials that you hadn't considered before. So, you know, whether it's 10 molecules that are now candidates for OLEDs, if any of them work, then that can, you know, be held secret. And then you can work on that, you can develop it, tweak it, make it better. And that can keep you going for a couple of generations. But again, after that, you kind of need to innovate. You kind of need to go beyond what you had there.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think material science in general is such an interesting field because like the application, you know, we know that if you're looking for rare earth minerals, or you're trying to synthesize the equivalents of rare earth minerals, talk about sovereignty, talk about all the sort of security issues that the West and elsewhere is facing, supply chain issues, et cetera, right? This starts becoming a very salient topic, right? Because everyone is in this race to find better, cheaper, and more plentiful ways, right, to secure the materials that they're otherwise having to use elsewhere. And we're seeing this in real time at the moment, obviously, as well. So I wanted to switch pace for a second, right? And we've talked about it a little bit, but let's talk about material foundational models versus curated databases with pre-computed properties, right? So you built Diadem on a 50 million molecule set plus agentic AI. Which you back? Generative foundation models that invent novel molecules, or curated pre-computed libraries that prioritize immediate lab adoption? And what do you forfeit by choosing one over the other?
Yeah. I mean, it sort of goes back to a little bit what I said closer to the beginning, was that, the sort of generative stuff where they're making new molecules, and you don't even need to go too fancy into the AI to do that. You have like an optimization problem for a given properties, and you can sort of have inverse models that get back to a certain material or class of materials or library of materials for that given property. They're very good for that reason. So it's like, you're very finely tuning a material property, and you're designing for that one thing. That's whether then you can make it or not. So if you can make it, then that's great, but that's a little bit more effort. So I see the utility definitely in both, and using both and utilizing both as and when needed. But for us, it was that initial focus of there is already an untapped database here. There's already something that's there. They exist. And like you said, prioritizes immediate experimentation.
Why run before you can walk? Kind
so
of thing.
Do that first. And then, I mean, it also, some people will think like, what the question of where does it go beyond the 50 million? So we screened 50 million as I said, okay, that's what existed. We're not just waiting for the couple of million that get added every year. We are looking into those models that design materials. But currently what we do is we don't introduce bias. The only bias that we introduce is synthetic accessibility. So when we add new molecules, they are technically novel and haven't been synthesized before, but they won't be designed for a given property. Instead, they'll be designed for certain easy and facile chemical reactions. So built on very common molecular building blocks, where you'll piece together and then you'll make a molecule, and that'll have like an 80% chance of synthesis. Again, we can expand our database massively doing that. It's a combinatorial problem. So you can go hundreds of millions very easily. And that's where our focus is. It's those materials that can be made, and then you screen them, and then you find what exists out of them. On the side, you can do the generative things and design brand new molecules, but that is just inherently going to come with a complex challenge with synthesizing them, as I think it slows down the process a little bit.
So I just want to pick up on something you said. You don't want to introduce bias. So where can bias be introduced into the system?
So for us specifically, it's the synthetic accessibility, like I said. So a molecule can look a certain way. The only bias is, first of all, what building blocks did you use? How you connected them. So for us, there is a bias there. You have to admit, like, okay, it's not all chemistries. It's you used 4 or 5 different reaction types. You can only connect those molecules in a certain way here, there, different type of building blocks. It doesn't support all of chemistry. So that's where we would introduce bias just for the benefit of being able to test things in the lab. But where you would introduce bias are things like, okay, OLED materials, right? You look at all the OLED materials that perform well, and then you sort of design a database or a library of materials based on common features. So you get many descriptors you can download, or you can compute many descriptors for these molecules, both electronic, both how the molecule just looks, how certain bonds are formed, and it won't be, you visualizing it. Sometimes you see it. Sometimes you can see, these molecules look similar. In electronics, it's a bit more complicated than that. But the machine can learn.
Bear in mind, it's been like 30 years since I looked down a microscope. So I'm not entirely sure I would be able to identify one against the other.
It works a little bit better for drug discovery and things, because actually the shape of a molecule matters more. Whereas in electronics, it could be almost identical, and you put a nitrogen atom somewhere instead of a carbon atom, it's completely different electronic properties. So it is even more difficult.
Yeah.
So the machine can learn, though, based on if you download electronic level data, all sorts of things, and then you can implement bias directly. So you can now design molecules that rank high based on this sort of similarity, rank similarity between the ones that exist. And then if you can synthesize those materials, that is a surefire way to get a very good sort of next generation OLED material. It's just that is a challenge. Computational chemists are very good at doing this, and they're doing it. People can generate massive data sets on this. But again, how do you then get to experiment and justify the cost of, one interesting molecule could be someone's entire PhD to synthesize it. It could be a 60-step synthetic process.
Wow.
And then, so there is obviously a benefit to it, but also it comes at a great cost.
Yeah. I mean, what it sounds like, it's actually really interesting because it sounds like this is in its infancy. Like, I mean, obviously the processes have existed for ages, but no one has solved for that complexity, right? Or at least started trying to solve for that complexity. Whereas, to your point, and probably because there has been historically such a huge amount of money in life sciences and biotech, much easier to go down that route, right? So what do you think has changed, I guess, more recently that has allowed, I mean, I mentioned things like sovereignty and wanting to have security over supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you think has changed that makes this even more kind of valuable today than maybe 5 years ago? Or is it simply the fact that you now have both data sets plus the AI together, which obviously 4 years ago you may not have?
I mean, and that's the thing. Yeah, we speak about this materials discovery in a broad sense, but for us, so far, I've spoken very much in the small molecule sense. And like I said, when I mentioned we make data sets that are chemically feasible, again, this comes from partners and work that's happening in the drug discovery space. So when you're making small molecules, almost very massively focused on drug discovery, and it's that sort of small molecule synthesis. If you look at electronics beyond organic and sort of traditional electronics, it's a more of a complex beast. So you have sort of periodic solid state systems where you have to simulate this material that's technically modeled as infinite, and you add little defects that make massive impacts into the electronic properties. That's usually done in more complex simulations, and now the machine learning and AI is massively speeding that stuff up as well. So I think there's a big push in that space to get all these different materials that reduce reliance on those critical minerals that obviously becoming tighter and tighter, right, on the supply chain. So there is a big push there. So you'll see a lot of different efforts going and trying to speed up that process. I think those will have an inherent complexity when it comes to making the materials. Some people argue that, certain inorganic systems are easier to synthesize, and it's almost like, smelting things together. But yeah, obviously the very fine tuning of it is very difficult. And then eventually getting it into a device is difficult still. But yeah, definitely it's the predictive power. It's access to, first of all, these, what I've, quantum chemistry based calculations, which you couldn't do before. And now you can do them at massive speeds, especially by, implementing, ML corrections or machine learning corrections to speed up the process, or directly just predicting material properties from all the inputs that you can get from big data sets that exist. So that can be experimental data. It can be high quality theoretical data. So yeah, it has opened up a big chest of, opportunity there to find lots of different materials, because it is the speed. Now, some people can run these models on their computer now, their desktop, where before it would be, you had to have access
mainframes,
to high performance at least. So now it's just become accessible. So I think there is a big push now where drug discovery enjoyed that because their calculations were fast. You could do a lot of docking calculations at once. They would be millions. And they were like, all that we can do and narrow down from this haystack, they can find the needles much more easily. And now that's happening in the electronic space. It's like, there's all these molecules, and now we can actually see which ones are interesting to pursue. Before it was just where do we even look?
Out of interest, just before we move on to kind of the next thing I wanted to ask you, but out of interest, what sort of novel technology do you think will come out of the fact that it is now easier to discover these molecules and materials? Yeah,
I mean, it should sort of impact most things. So speaking again from my own expertise, it's all organic electronics. I think there's a case to be made for most of organic electronics. So I think there was a big hype around it in the 2010s in the UK, and then they sort of divested away from it because there was never really a focus on OLEDs, and then solar cells, like this interest in plastic solar cells and polymer-based or small molecule solar cells became big. And then that sort of the UK divested a little bit away from that, mainly because there is a sort of efficiency limit, not an efficiency limit, so to say, but it can't compete with silicon-based technologies for a solar cell. So that is always going to, for a very long time, have a higher efficiency. The problem with silicon tech is that it's bulky, difficult, expensive to process, and now, again, it's a critical material. So there's a case for organic solar cells, but they're less efficient. And there's no sort of industrial level fabrication to print them on demand. So there are companies trying to do that. As I said, UK has gone a little bit away, but Germany is a big hub for that, a massive, massive hub. So the EU is got some good research interest there, but they're not at the level of like mass scale, roll to roll and sort of OLED fabrication. So OLED is really the dominant player. But I think if pushed far enough to not use materials that are already used, so let's say in transistors or a new fields of like wearable electronics and biotechnology, which may be coming more from the US, organic electronics has a very sort of big utility there, and you can design so many different sort of devices that wouldn't have been able to be possible with normal electronics. So you can't have a flexible solar cell that can wrap around the entire building. That might be very good, maybe not in the UK, but in hot countries and things like the UAE and things like that, or like these smart cities where you can sort of have a lot of devices interacting with each other that are very lightweight, and you can't see them obviously, or screens that are curvy, and so all these like cool sort of futuristic tech. Organic electronics can allow you to sort of do that. But yeah, just going beyond organic electronics, you can design new materials for, like I mentioned, like transistors and carbon capture technologies. So these are big like cage-like structures. Again, these were computationally expensive at the time to model, but now you have these machine learning models can speed up the sort of prediction of their properties that you can screen for thousands of them. So before, a technology that really wasn't being implemented anywhere is now being actively sort of having platforms, digital platforms, to help you find new ones. So there's a lot of different things, and previous to this sort of boom in machine learning and things like that was sort of almost impossible to do at scale.
Yeah. No, what's really interesting is, like you mentioned, organic is never going to be as efficient in solar, for example, right? But that isn't the point, because if you can't build a traditional silicon-based solar panel because you don't have access to the materials, you need something as a substitute. So again, it comes back to having, even if it's a backup rather than the primary source, right? Like you need something available to you in case everything else goes wrong. And let's face it, we live in a world where we seem to be always like 3 steps away from everything going wrong one way or the other. And again, to your point around, smart cities and those sort of applications, absolutely, I can see. And, again, Saudi's got its own program, UAE's got its own program. I've seen, attempts to do this in Africa, and, Singapore has been like a real sort of leader in that kind of space over time as well. So, the things that we look at in the UK and say, well, it might not, it's science fiction, it's never going to, whatever. These countries are doing them. And yes, the UK has stepped away from them. At some point, you would hope that it kind of catches up and says, well, actually, no, this stuff is valuable. And actually, it doesn't need to be everywhere, but actually it makes sense to be here, right? Or if we want all houses to be solar powered in the future, like, does it, but people are worried about, the look and the cost and this and that and the other. Okay, so if you can come up with a lower cost, more efficient, or not more efficient, but a lower cost and easier to produce product, then adoption rises as well. So there are trade-offs, as with everything, right? But sometimes those trade-offs are positive as well.
I think a lot of the time we don't take it seriously. So you say like there's a novel technology that's organic electronics, you can make transistors or something, or sensors, but because they've dug themselves into a pit with the sort of main materials that are used, like I said, it'll need a lot of capital investment if you want to scale up these technologies. So for us, we enjoy the fact that we can be quite blue sky about it and say we target early stage materials discovery. It's very important. Of course, the reality is if you try to scale up, even a startup who gets to a final device might not be successful, even if it's an amazing device.
Getting it out of the lab.
How do you get it into industry? We dig ourselves into these pits. And so, but I do think like even at the academic stage, it's not taken seriously enough to say, silicon and these sort of materials or these devices have always been enjoyed and they're very, very good. But what happens if it goes away? What happens if the supply is weakened? Why are you not taking alternative technologies more seriously? You should definitely take them more seriously. So there's a lot of promise, but also needs more education.
I think about this quite a lot. Like, what happens tomorrow if great example. I mean, not in material science, but yesterday Claude went down, right? And I mean, fine. like I survived. Like it wasn't my life didn't end, and frankly, I can use my brain, so that was helpful. But we become more and more reliant on all sorts of technology, right? Whether it's your mobile phone, whether it's the iPad, whether it's I'm now writing on a e-ink writing pad or whatever, right? Like you become reliant on all sorts of technology for all sorts of reasons, and therefore I always think about, well, what happens if the worst were to happen? Let's say, I don't know, internet cables are cut, or mobile phones are no longer producible because there's a trade war with XYZ country, whoever, right? We need to figure out how to deal with those circumstances, those situations. And it doesn't really matter how far-fetched they seem, because at some point you may well need the most far-fetched, right? To carry on surviving. So I think those companies that I've come across within the material sciences space, whether that is synthetic leather for shoes, or whether that is literally companies that I've spoken to that are looking to replicate rare earth minerals, like these become massively important in the grand scheme of things. But getting them out of the lab into production, etc., that's always a challenge. I want to kind of switch track a little bit, right? But you spun Diadem. Is it Diadem or Diadem?
Diadem, but
Diadem. Okay, right. So you spun Diadem and Apollo essentially out of University of Liverpool after an EIC transition grant, and the university invested on terms alongside SFC Capital, and I know SFC well, so good like SCIS fund. So when does a university's financial stake accelerate the commercial momentum, and when does it create friction in the cap table that actually creates problems for follow-on investors?
So I think University Spinouts is an interesting case now. We're sort of fortunate to have tried to spin out when the universities kind of learned their lesson a little bit on what they were doing.
They've been hammered so much by people like me saying stuff like this.
Yeah, how can you take 50% straight away with nothing? And that was like before even investing into the company, right? So the University of Liverpool, from what I can tell, has taken a little bit of a leading step in being fairer to spin-outs and having people who are come from a background of potentially investment, or they're definitely trying to learn. They're not siloed again like they used to be. There are these sort of principles that they follow, which say that, okay, if you want to be an investable company, if you want to spin out an investable company, then take a step back, though you can't take too much equity. And an interesting one as well is obviously investing into the companies that you spin out. I mean, it sounds obvious, but a lot of universities and a lot of companies don't get investment from their hosts.
Actually put in cash.
Yeah, actually putting in cash.
Okay, so normally it's just like, we'll take 25%.
For their IP. Yeah. Which is obviously, you can, or academics will argue all day about who owns and things like that. Obviously, contractually, the university does, but it's like, what's fair and things. But going beyond all that, the University of Liverpool has been very good on that sort of, trying to revitalize the sort of interest into the Northwest. And I think they're doing a very good job. The University of Manchester as well are very, very good. So sort of outside of the Golden Triangle, they're trying to emulate and even do better on some things. So far, there's not been too much like friction in that sense. There were things that potentially could have been done better in terms of timelines and working with people who are fundamentally they're academics, right? And you want them to spin out a company. And then you are also learning at the same time how to do that best. So you can't, say too much on that. But everyone's trying to work together to do something properly. So then sometimes it can get a little bit restrictive on, do this, or involving too many people at the start, too many chefs in the kitchen at the start, where you're talking about a company that's maybe at this corporate level stages.
Putting a board together.
Yeah, before
that's you've launched a product.
So like a fully fledged board, but the first people for sure, like the first experts and stuff in into the commercial side of things, I think is super important. Like the founder needs to get out of that fully academic mindset, which shouldn't be understated, because it is just a different world. You kind of need to code switch completely and also switch back when you need to do the technical and, things like that. So I think Liverpool were very good. Some things were a little bit protracted in timelines, and, you have to work a little bit better with the academics timelines. And if you're going to invest, then don't draw things out and do it too late and then sink your own companies, which luckily didn't happen for us, but I've heard stories in the past. So they're good. I don't know if it's something that's replicated across all UK higher education institutions. So Liverpool had my recommendation there. Definitely learning, I think, alongside as well. But I think it is the common thing where if a university is not at the very least doing that, it's, take a step back, and the equity is such a big deal. So if you're going to take a large amount of equity, it has to be a really good reason why. And chances are you're going to be an uninvestable company. And also, teach your founder to sort of train away from just academia and actually fundraising and the commercial aspects of it.
Come to me if you want any, honestly, if you want any advice on this stuff. Not my first rodeo. But no, look, I mean, joking aside, I think tech transfer in general is, it's been very maligned in the past for exactly the reasons we talked about, right? But equally, and I think, you and I were talking as we came into the studio, we're in a place right now where research in Europe especially has never been stronger, right? And the UK has always led in terms of research. And our university programs are great, and people want to come here from all over the world, or certainly used to want to come here from all over the world to participate in those programs. And, the more we can take what's happening in academia out into the commercial world, the better it's going to be for everyone, right? Both for the academic, both for the university. Well, for the university, because reputationally that gives them massive, a massive platform. For the academics and the founders, because that gives them access to this, essentially whole new world. And for the country in general, because you are producing homegrown, novel technologies that really potentially do actually move the needle in ways that may not have been the case in the past. So I think I think it's massively important that we do get this right. And I've actually had a couple of people. So I had someone on, I want to say last year, it may even have been the year before actually at this point. But he had worked with CERN and previously with a lot of universities in Australia and then the UK, et cetera, but basically had figured out how to make tech transfer work, right? In a way that was beneficial to all. And, is now, I think, kind of consulting along, alongside that and to help founders coming out of academic institutions to be able to structure that better, but also to help universities do that. And equally, also how to figure out how to go from lab to production, right? Like how to go from from a kilo or a meter to a kilometer or a ton, right? Like, and this is the problem. Now, what universities are great at is obviously you have the academic and you have the thinking, right? Like you have the people who can basically, who have sat there and been thinking about this stuff for years. And you can draw on their expertise. What universities have never been good at, or academic institutions in general, is commercializing, right? Because they are commercial to some extent, but they're not truly commercial entities, right? And so finding the right set of people that can guide, that can support, and that can help grow these businesses outside of the academic setting is massively important. But, and this is the kind of very roundabout way of what I was trying to get to, is it is equally important that university is in the picture. But they just shouldn't own 50% of the business, right? Like that's essentially the point. And equally, I think, there are ways of resolving this down the track, but the university has to be flexible and open to doing those, right? Like if it feels like they are overweight on the cap table, well, there are ways of resolving that. They're not, they're a bit messy, and they're not, not everyone wants to do them. But there are ways. I think the whole point is, if the university has realized that actually by spinning out these businesses from our research labs, actually there is second order value beyond the commercial value itself, then that in itself should, A, suggest that they should do more of it, but B, that they should do it in a way that obviously doesn't bind the founders thereafter, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned as well, sort of the research quality comes out of the Europe is almost unmatched, right? In many different sectors. So I can't speak too much on the sort of US model, but the hype and the sort of culture around investing into new technologies is it's quite hyped up there. So capital is accessible. So I think whether or not that's coming to the UK and the EU and things like that, they're definitely more risk averse as well. But if you get the ball rolling and show that we have unmatched research in the EU, if you want to make the new technologies, then you can't ever make it a thought in a founder's mind to say that, should I just go to the US for capital? Should I just go to China for capital, who is becoming more dominant in certain aspects as well? So it can't really be a thought. So whether it's the administrative things around actually making a company, which is easier in the UK. So I know the EU are trying to make steps to make it easy in the EU. So they have their own issues, right?
Yeah.
And you'd think capital would be easy in the UK. That is definitely not. It moves slow. It takes a long time to close rounds. And you just hear about people, and this could be anecdotal, but you hear about people moving a lot faster in the US. Access to capital.
It's not just anecdotal.
Yeah, I'm sure. I see LinkedIn posts and things like that. Here's the data to support it. So yeah, definitely, I think there's something to it. But yeah, it is that capital is so much more accessible. And don't concentrate it somewhere that's outside of the EU. Like, people want to go to Silicon Valley. Like they go to university here, to Oxford or Cambridge. They have a technology and then they move it over there. It's just a bit like, there should never even be that possibility. It's not like forcing them to say that you have to do it here. It's access to capital, access to the proper support, make sure when they're spinning out, it's done very smoothly. There's not too many hiccups and bumps, so that they think, actually, this could be easier somewhere else. And then they reap the benefits of that person, their technology and things like that.
No, I think it's a problem that we've talked about like far more often than I would have liked to on this podcast, right? Like, the UK has some great things. I mean, and Europe in general, right? The part of the problem is we don't have deep pockets of capital, right? So especially with things that are very R&D intensive, it makes it harder to scale here. Secondly, we have fragmented markets, whereas the US, in theory, is a homogenous market. It's not. It's 50 countries, right? But at the same time, it is one language, it is one federal system, and you can advertise the same way, and you can have the same product in each and every state. You can't do that in Europe, for example, right? The other thing, and I think this, I've been saying this a bit more regularly of late, we forget that venture in the UK is only about 15 years old, if that, right? Like, it's still very young. In the US, it's been going on since the 60s. Like, they've just done a huge amount more of it. And there is the capital there, right? Like, and the difference is, you have a market in the UK of 60 million, let's call it 70 million. In the US, that's 300 plus, right? Europe is 500 million, but it's fragmented to the extent that it is, right? So I don't think we can solve a lot of those problems easily or simply. I think that will take time. I personally don't see a future where companies won't scale into the US. The question is whether they scale into the US, exit in the US, or move to the US, right? Like, that is the bigger conundrum. And we've seen it time and time again. The problem is, at those later stages, the beneficiaries are not our pension funds, it's the US pension funds, right? And that's the shame, right? Like, there could be so much more. But, and again, to your point, it's not about trying to keep people here. It's about how do you set up the ecosystem in a way that not only attracts talent, but allows founders to remain. And I think some of the things that have been discussed or talked about, things like exit taxes, etc., whether they materialize or not, the problem is, the minute you put that thought into a founder's head, immediately the thought process is, well, okay, maybe I should get out sooner rather than later, right?
And whether there's some benefit to even the company's operations and things like that to move. The opportunity just needs to be a bit more open. And it's easier said than done, right? And maybe, and this is my sort of bias, and it's whether it's putting a focus potentially on things, I don't want to say matter more, but the deep tech space, or things that are like, seeing
things
into
that are
the
in ascendancy,
things that we require, that we rely too much on the outside, especially outside of Europe. So, especially materials and things like that. We're talking about it today. These are like super end devices, things that we rely on, energy, renewable energies, that sort of infrastructure. Those things are sort of critical to life. And so if if a region was to become a little bit more isolated, as the EU and the UK are becoming, then you need a bit of sovereignty over those things. So whether or not you make it, you start in stages, overall capital for everyone, and, a better culture around that, for entrepreneurship and stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. We need it. We need it like how the US do it, but starting strategically in certain sectors where, a little bit more hype around things that come out of universities, because us coming out of a university, and whether it was an effect of just being a more regional university, there weren't investors jumping on everything that comes out. They have good connections, and have just recently made new networks with sort of Northern Gritstone and other investment companies, and they do always watch, but it isn't like what I imagine something come out of Harvard or those universities in the US and just having investors just constantly being there and being like, oh, what's the new thing? What's the new thing? What's
Cambridge,
the new
LSE, over here. Yeah,
and
sure.
I think, to a certain extent, Oxbridge and that it happens there. But from sort of conversations I've had with founders there, they say, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. They're not getting that mass invest interest either. And, and that's because it's the risk aversion as well. A lot of people are pre-seed, pre-revenue. That almost just shuts investors off. It's like, it's a university, you're in deep tech, the sales cycles might be slow, or you still need to prove something. If you're seeing the potential, then opening up capital for that, I think it'd be very useful. But it's just like pre-seed, pre-revenue, you just switch off. And I think for certain things,
So my counter argument to that is, and I've seen this, in the data, but also anecdotally, there is a massive shift happening in European venture. More money is absolutely flowing into the deep tech space. However, the total amount of money has stayed flat. So what it means is there's more money going into fewer companies, but those companies tend to be in deep tech, life sciences, material sciences, et cetera, because, and I've always said that this is where venture, was birthed, right? In Silicon Valley. It's called Silicon Valley for a reason. We're not building transformers necessarily or capacitors or whatever, but in order to build the next wave of technology, we need these industries to thrive. So I would say for anyone who's out there in this sort of a space, I actually do think that there is more opportunity, and there is, I think VCs especially are more open to investing in R&D intensive businesses compared to where they were like 5-10 years ago. So 5-10 years ago, you could build a software business exit within 10 years. Now, software used to eat the world. Now the world is eating software, where AI is eating software. Therefore, where does your money go? It goes into hardware. It goes into, companies that have deep moats with distribution or with proprietary data. And this is where obviously deep tech excels, right? So I think that is changing. And I think in the UK and Europe, you can raise decent capital, but, and this is the challenge and always has been the challenge, you can get your seed done here, you can get your A done here. Can you get your B or your C done here? That's always the challenge. Well, certainly if even if you can get your B or C done here, can you get your D and beyond, right? Like that's where the challenge has consistently been. So yeah, look, let's see. But I think exactly to your point, I think if there's, hopefully this podcast helps with that. Like, if there's more noise and more, more promotion, I guess, of the fact that we do have these great research institutes and great founders like yourself coming out of them, then we should celebrate that, but we should also make sure it happens more and more.
Yeah.
And can I ask you actually, so at a personal level, are you happier as a founder or as an academic?
Oh, as a founder. Yeah. So academia, I think, and it's one thing that you could have a whole podcast episode on. I do think in the UK and even around the EU, there's more and more barriers to becoming an academic, and people do question whether it's worth doing. Sure. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress. The funding dries up for a lot of R&D things as well, whether or not that's because it's a shift to more tangible results or whether it's just because money is drying out. So being an academic, currently it almost is not, people don't want to do it, but they do want to do science. Yeah. So it's like, so that's why doing this.
How can I get paid to do science?
Yeah, and then having a real impact as well. So it's like, one thing is sort of understated is that if you are a scientist, spinning out a company that sells a product is one of the few ways you can actually see your science make impact in the world. Yeah, because you're nothing, that's just how the world works. So that's one major element of it. And yeah, academia, as rewarding as it can be and great for people to pursue, so we have better and better science coming out, it is having its own major barriers as well. It's more and more difficult.
Yeah, well, let's see if we can change that.
Yeah.
And look, I think, I think one of the biggest challenges to becoming a founder has always been, okay, access to capital was one. Access to talent is the other, right? Access to capital is no longer as important, right? In one sense, because certainly if you're building something in the software space, you can now do that at next to no cost or like very, very cheaply. Access to talent, like again, as we said, Europe and the UK has some phenomenal, researchers, and you can find those people. And frankly, we're cheaper than the US. So my niece actually told me, she's at Warwick. One of her friends in the second year, who's a computer scientist, has quit university and moved to Silicon Valley, where he was offered a $250,000 job, right? Like, and you're just like, okay, but like computer scientists here are anywhere between 80 and 120K, and you're like, okay, there is a mismatch, right? Like happening. 100%. So I think, but I think but I think that talent is still here, right? Because people do want to live in the UK and Europe. So I actually think, the biggest barrier now is whether you as an individual have, know that you have agency, i.e., you know what, I'm just going to sit down, fiddle around with Claude or fiddle around with N8N or fiddle around with whichever tool and build something right now. Okay. In terms of, can you build something in material sciences that is, of course not, right? Like that's not going to happen. What I think will happen is that you'll just see a lot of people becoming solo entrepreneurs with $500,000 businesses or £200,000 businesses or £1 million businesses, right? Where they can run that essentially on the side alongside their own job. That gives them optionality, and maybe that's where the capital flows into some of these cutting and bleeding edge technologies that hopefully will continue to get spun out. I want to close off with one last question on organic electronics, because certainly for me, I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. The last time I touched science was at GCSEs. I was good, but I just didn't do anything with it thereafter. But organic electronics is almost presented as a parallel to traditional electronics, right? So you target molecule level discovery in academic labs first. When does molecule level digital discovery stop mattering for device engineers, and what revenue and time trade-offs do you accept by delaying that focus on enterprise?
We'd definitely want to target those enterprises in the labs that sort of targeted the same thing. So if they wait for academics to do it, then it's a licensing thing. So if a paper's published, then it's public and everyone's using it. So there are definitely those labs that are working on that. But yeah, it is definitely more of because it almost feels blue skies, like, okay, can we have a new molecule that does this? Starting from the molecule to device, there's a big chain. So just discovering the molecule, and then you test it in the lab, it's early characterization, say everything goes well, and actually this molecule is actually performing as predicted. Then you have to sort of put that thing in, deposit it on a surface, check its properties then when it's in sort of this deposited phase, let's say, on top of a device. Does it interface with the other materials? So you have this device that's like a stack, and you're maybe just designing a molecule for one layer of it, which has that's the color, but it's also working with the other parts of the device that sort of move the electrons around the circuit and things like that. So there is a big jump there, and there is software to support those kind of predictions. It's a lot more complex, and the results and accuracy are much more variable. So I think that's where, if you wanted to say where does prediction need to go, well, it needs to go to supporting those stages of the device development as well, using things like machine learning to massively speed up that as well. So there is a big barrier there, but for us, there is already a barrier at the start. So at the very least, you need to remove the barrier at the start so that you have the...
How can you find the molecule?
Yeah, how can you find it? And then the experimental things is just a fundamental part of the problem. And of course, there's going to be a massive focus of things like Samsung and Sony. They have a huge focus on that final device level engineering, because it is the more important aspect of actually getting the device to market, of course. So that's where you would maybe, you could talk to scientists at Samsung, and 70-80% of them would, we don't touch the molecules. In fact, we have suppliers give us a
later stage.
Yeah, so they would never even talk about, they're not chemists, they're engineers, and so that definitely happens. So that's where, there's not as much returns. But of course, for us, is as things go on, as compute gets more powerful, it's trying to support maybe the entire stack for as generalist as possible. Like, we don't want to focus just on OLEDs, for example, but trying to support with compute is the main idea. It's computational chemistry for everyone, right? So if you're an experimentalist, previously you couldn't use it because it was too expensive. And now you can't use it because you're not an expert. You don't know how to do it. And then now you have these agentic AI systems, and you have people for, across all different sectors, and for us, organic electronics, making it accessible for you. because you could just type in the properties that you want and get to the materials that you don't need to mess about. And if you do need to perform some more advanced calculations, so we also provide that. So when I said the more device level properties, we have additional calculations where, experimenters can just pick it and they pick their 5 molecules, they select this calculation, it'll run on our cloud servers, it'll email them a summary when it's done. And so they can have as much support before taking something to the lab, which is where the big waste is. So you can spend a lot of money, lots of solvent, lots of human time.
Pre-discovery, essentially.
Yeah, it's the so there's a pre-characterization. And so when you get to the point of saying this molecule should in principle emit blue light and be stable and non-toxic, that should be correct. And now that is a big hurdle to get across. But now, of course, you do have the hurdle of device development, which does need more support, I think, as well.
Yeah, but you're an early stage business. You can't solve it all
No.
immediately.
And
right?
Who knows how many years it'll take to actually get full, because, as I said, machine learning is speeding up a lot of things. And for the molecular level properties, they're already fairly accurate. So you can train on experimental data that's going to translate very well into the computational side of things. So the machine can learn it easily. Or even the high quality data you can get from theory is already very accurate. But when you're looking at device level properties, the computation is so expensive that, first of all, you're probably not going to get good data. If you take experiment, again, massively variable, hugely heterogeneous data set. So the experiment was done under certain conditions, even a few degrees Celsius difference, it makes a huge impact. So all this data you can use to train machines to do, so machine learning models, is either going to be fragmented experiments data or difficult to produce and highly variable accuracy theoretical data. You're not going to be able to build those models easily to support that stage. So how long it takes to actually get to the point of speeding up to some good material difference, that level of things is going to be a bigger challenge, but it needs to be done as well.
But the point is, if you start at the bottom of the stack, you have at least an entry point to get there, right? Like, I think exactly the point is, and a lot of this stuff takes, A, time to adopt, but B, also time to actually figure out where the pain point is. And equally, as you say, as models improve, as the technology improves, you may reach an inflection point, or there may be, some sort of milestone which just allows you to flip kind of seamlessly into that. I think the point is, you don't solve the whole problem day one. You start with a small chunk. Omer, look, it's been absolutely phenomenal speaking to you. I have a couple of questions which I ask all of my guests. So to round things off, what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
So how do I think differently to other people in something?
One that most people can't answer for the most part, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So give me one of yours that you would say.
Oh, wow. Okay. Do I have a contrarian? So not so contrarian, but I think the education system is not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And hasn't been for a long time, but even more so now. Yeah. Another contrarian conviction is I actually think that borders are meaningless. And I think, I've lived in multiple different countries. I felt at home in every country I've lived. And, irrespective of my skin color, my ethnicity, my religion, religious beliefs, if I have any or whatever, I think that individuals should be able to move around freely. But clearly that is against the current trend.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess not to go into politics and things like that, but that is actually, I get a big belief of mine as well, that people think there is a huge problem in immigration. And so, again, I'm somebody I was born here, but of a certain ethnic background. And then you do feel that more than, the average person. It does sort of become more important aspect of your life. And then you sort of look at the data and you think, this is not as big of an issue as the powers that be try to make it. And in fact, it's overall a positive thing. So it is difficult, and I guess it would be contrarian to the normal person to think that you need to have mass control over something like this, where, of course, certain checks and things like that are very, very important.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, something that I would say is it's a very hyped up sensationalist thing that is extremely damaging, and obviously it's an overall positive thing that's been made into as if it's a negative thing, and the problem to the reason for all our problems. And
by the way, one of the reasons that we have such great research is because of migration.
Exactly.
Immigration, right?
So in the academic world, this is a given. So people say, like, yeah, it's amazing. There's free movement and things like that, and then different perspectives, and it doesn't matter where you're from to come up with all these sort of thing. So more mixing is better for that. So that's that sort of liberal view, if you want to call it, is definitely present. But by and large, across normal populations, it's trending the other way, which now makes us contrarians, I suppose. And it's a bad thing. So, and especially in a world with declining birth rates. So in the world, part of the world of declining birth rates, the solution for that is immigration. That's the reason why some countries like the US, for example, unless there's a huge sort of control of that sort of thing, is going to survive what maybe countries like Japan and China are going to suffer from, because they're not.
And I saw a post recently, and I haven't checked the data on this, but it's from a relatively reliable source. But apparently, within the next couple of years, we will see the first population decline in the UK, both because obviously deaths are outstripping births, but secondly, because migration is also we're now seeing negative migration, right? So the population is shrinking, and to your point, that has massive impact across the board. But look, I mean, again, I could probably talk about that subject for a long time, but I'd rather not for lots of reasons. And so finally, so we can get to know the real you, what is something that moves you the most emotionally?
Yeah, emotionally. I'm actually a creative, I would say. I know I went to a very technical background, and it was almost like I said, there wasn't really a gap between me just going from school to uni, because everyone's doing it. And you can argue how good of an idea uni is nowadays, especially if you want the sort of entrepreneurial sort of opportunities are becoming bigger with like AI and things like that. So maybe I would recommend going down that route for many people nowadays. But for me, it was seemed to have a very smooth transition, which led to a good opportunity. So there wasn't a huge gap for me, and I was always I liked science, but I've always been sort of more of a creative, so storytelling and writing and things like that. So that is something that I will potentially in my future look into a little bit more deeply. Right now, I'm certainly more focused on the technology and that, which I do love. But yeah, for me, it's storytelling and things like that. Writing is definitely a big one.
Amazing. Omer, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you in the studio. For the audience, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? Where's the best place for them to look for you on the internet?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So they can find me on LinkedIn. I guess you've just typed in my name, but Omer Omar would be the handle that comes up. I don't use Twitter or X, or if you want to call it. So LinkedIn was the major thing. And of course, our website is there, www.apollo.com.
Apollo with an E, guys.
Apollo with an E.
We will put it.
If you want to call it Apollo, you can do. Look at all these companies that are always pronounced a lot wrong. Nike, Nike, or people say Adidas. It's Adidas. They're doing all right for themselves. So Apollo.
You'll figure it out.
It's a good memory. It reminds you of it. Let's say.
No worries at all. Well, look, Omer, it's been absolutely wonderful having you here. Thank you so much, and it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much.